understand about today's context is we're talking about the context of war, where countries already have high tensions and are ready to unleash weapons onto their opponents. We're in a state of panic and frenzy, where whatever kind of harm to humanity where their side talk about is not really applicable in this case. What we're talking about, we're not talking about countries where they unleash weapons on their own citizens. We're talking about context where countries are choosing or deciding whether or not to use chemical weapons when it comes to warfare. Now, moving on to 3 points of contention before the House today. Firstly, the idea of where do we draw the line. Secondly, the idea about how does this affect road states. And thirdly, on how this whether this harms the principles of IHL. Moving on to the first point, of where do we draw the line? So we also came up with the idea that states have the right to autonomy to choose what they want to do. Or they didn't really respond to this. All they did to say was that, oh, there was 2 lines to be drawn. Firstly, the first line to be drawn is that it's indiscriminate and it will only be used on citizens, or most of the time only used on citizens. We have 3 responses to this. Firstly, we say, right, it has came up from my first speaker and second speaker, that it depends on the users that are using it. That the harms that all the sites bring about that will be used on citizens only manifest on the types of users that use it. We think that drone strikes, bombs, or anything can be indiscriminate and can be used to target civilians, but it is not, and it's still allowed because there's a potential for it to be targeted, in which we see in this case, we'll be explaining it to you later. And we also bring down you from my first speaker in the policy that the conduct of war still exists. That means chemical weapons cannot be used indiscriminately on the civilians, just like the just war principles. We're not denying the conduct. We're just saying that we should allow another kind of weapon to be on stage that can be used potentially in a targeted manner. Secondly, now why can they use why are these chemical weapons indiscriminate? We think that yes, chemical weapons are gas particles that can affect many, but in order for chemical weapons to be actually effective, it has to be unleashed in a small contained manner or small contained room. If not, the effects of these chemical weapons might be diluted by the kind of wind that blows it and disperses into a big area. That means these chemical weapons are only effective if it's unleashed into a small contained area. If it's unleashed in a big open field, all that's going to happen is this chemical gas is going to be spread out, and it's not going to have that much of a great effect as their side try to claim. And we think that most of the time this kind of chemicals weapon, we think that the kind of line that you draw that's indiscriminate already does not exist in status quo. As my second speaker already brought out, when we bring out ideas that cluster bombs and anti-personnel mines are being used in status quo, is to prove that the kind of standard that we draw to when we ban weapons does not stand on a line that is indiscriminate. It may be stand on any other line, but not the line that is indiscriminate. Even if that's why anti-personnel mines and cluster bombs are still allowed to exist in status quo. The line that they draw is a completely arbitrary line. They will only make the consistency of IHL look like a joke if in case they will allow weapons with similar circumstance to continue to exist and be legal. But now moving on to the second, next idea, whether it is actually brutal, and that's what they say, that it's a solid state of humanity and it's against the very core of humanity. Firstly, we say that it's not true. We need to understand that the context we're talking about is that when the brutality of war already exists. When a man can have 10 gunshot wounds and die bleeding on the field, when his limbs can be shot to billions and billions of hearts due to a bomb, or where every member of every person on the ship that is sunk will suffocate to death in like let's say 1 hour when the ship is sinking and going down. Yes, ma'am.
We think that the bleeding to death is something we don't condone because it's against IHL principles. So all the harms that you talk about are already prevented under our model. Ineffectiveness doesn't necessitate repealment of ban. Just because in India you have people raping each other down the road doesn't mean we should allow rape.
Yes, but what you are trying to say is that in cases where we don't even allow bombing of the ship, we should ban every single country from having any single weapon because the potential of having a long drawn-out death is still there. What their side is trying to say is that no country in this world should have a single weapon because every weapon has the potential to be indiscriminate and every weapon, even a gun, has the potential to cause long and painful death. This is something that you have to do with, and it cannot cannot just say that just because chemical weapons have some sort of potential to cause these kinds of death doesn't mean it do so. And we think that the second level is even if level. Even if they will force us to say yes, there are chemical weapons, they are poisonous, they are lethal. We think that what they are trying to say is that on one hand there's a contradiction. On one hand they say it's effective and it's the end all be all. And on the other hand they say it's not effective and it's not effective in the killing and therefore you can do all this to have all this second strike and this kind of things. So we don't think that they need to clear up this contradiction. Our side simply says that yes, it's effective and therefore we need to ban it. Now we think that furthermore, we think that the lines that they draw for us today does not really exist in today's debate. Now moving on to the second point of contention, which is something that our side focus more on, is the idea of rogue states. Now the other side saying that banning and regulation, the other side when you ban, you regulate them. But this is the thing, and here they forget to be realistic in today's society, is that rogue states will never listen to the bans or regulation, to the levies or sanctions that you put on them. It's very clear that North Korea, even after so much controversial, can still have nuclear weapons in their arms of defense. But knowing this kind of context and knowing that rogue states will never give in to this, the only way and the best way, to deal with this kind of thing is to attack it with the same and equal amount of force. That means allowing countries in cases where they are being retaliated to have the option of using this second strike against them. And then we bring on the idea of mutually assured destruction, which the only thing they say is that these countries are insane. Now, what they fail to recognize is that dictators in these countries are not completely insane, that they have certain rationality in having a grasp on the kind of power. Having a chemical weapons and leveling your ground and leveling all your civilians to the ground is not helpful to the kind of incentive that plays in the mind of dictators, because how are you going to lead a country when there's no country to be led? To be led. And we think, therefore, right, and the kind of paradigm that their side bring about, that countries will retaliate and then there will be a massive, both sides will bomb each other and things like that, is precisely what rogue states and what other states will consider before using chemical weapons. The very fact that they brought up the narrative where if you bomb someone, they will use chemical weapons on you back. It already shows that this is what is going on the mind of any rogue states, on any dictators out there, and it's something that will deter them greatly in this case. And we think that on the idea of leveling the playing field, well, they say that, as my second speaker already brought up, which they didn't really deal with, is that on one hand, in terms of conventional weapons, it is a number game. That means the more conventional weapon they have, the better it is. But in terms of chemical weapons, even if you have, it doesn't matter whether your opponents have 1,000 chemical weapons and you only have 10. The threat of you having chemical weapons is big enough to form a line of defense, and that is why leveling the playing field and closing the power margin between big states like Russia, like China, against states like Singapore is actually very effective. But lastly, to the idea on the principles of IHL, we need to understand that the idea that they bring out that you shouldn't change it off is completely ridiculous. We think that every IH law or directive is a norm that fits a time or a time or the norm in a particular time. So it takes precedence over what has happened in the past, and in case where it's perceived to be comparatively more beneficial and less costly to the world, it should still continuously be allowed. When the norm of today's society is rogue states running out there with chemical weapons on hand, we should allow chemical weapons.